Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 18 of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa, our 99th episode overall. Can you believe it? I'm your host, Melissa Whitecross, coming to you live from a rather chilly Johannesburg, South Africa. We want to remind you that all of our shows are recorded and available on YouTube. So if you miss out because the lights go dark, you can always catch up later. And while you're there, please remember to click that subscribe button and grow the support for our channel. Now, tonight's webinar is going to take us on a journey to the arid west of South Africa as we unpack the ecological importance of sociable weaver nests with Associate Professor Robert Thompson. But before we get to our main event, just a reminder to communicate with us using the chat and Q&A feeds in Zoom or the comment feed on Facebook Live. We'll answer all of these questions at the end of the webinar. We are on all major social media channels, and you can use the hashtag Conservation Conversations to let us know what you think of the show. And thanks as always for the generous contributions towards our webinars, which help to keep these shows free for all to learn and enjoy. Visit our Cricket page or EFT BirdLife South Africa directly using the reference webinars with your name. Now, Middelpunt Wetland is the only confirmed breeding site of the critically endangered white-winged flufftail in South Africa, and it is in the process of being declared as a private nature reserve by BirdLife South Africa and the Mpumalanga Tourism and Parks Authority. The wetland is facing the threat of cattle trampling the sensitive vegetation, and to prevent this, we are raising funds to install a 4-kilometer wildlife-friendly fence to keep the cattle out but allow the wildlife to continue moving through. Once installed, the fence design will be evaluated and hopefully incorporated into best practice guidelines for national applications. Please consider supporting the wildlife-friendly fence by purchasing a mere 10 meters of fence line for only 500 Rand. Donations can be made via the Cricket link that will be posted shortly. BirdLife South Africa, in collaboration with the Overberg Renosterveld Conservation Trust, as well as the EWT, have partnered to raise support and awareness for more tracking devices to help us understand the movements of the endangered endemic black harrier across the Western Cape. Please visit the Back a Buddy campaign to support this worthy cause. We'll be joined by Doctors Rob Simmons and Odette Curtis-Scott for a webinar on the black harrier later this month, so tune in to find out more. And this Pride Month, BirdLife South Africa is committed to ensuring an inclusive, supportive and welcoming birding community through the sale of limited edition pin badges during the month of June. Show your support for birders across all orientations, creeds and colors, and get your hands on one of only 90 badges available. They are just 55 Rand each and available through our online store. Bookings are also open for the 2023 Kruger Bird and Wildlife Challenge, taking place from 12 to 19 February 2023 in partnership with Rock Jumper Birding Tours. Funds raised will go towards our white-winged flufftail conservation project. Teams made up from South Africans who register before the end of this month will qualify for a discounted rate, and you can visit Rock Jumper's birding website to find out more and book your spot today. Stand a chance to win while supporting BirdLife South Africa's important conservation efforts. BirdLife South Africa's annual raffle is now open, and you could win your share of 135,000 Rand. I think in these economic times, we could certainly all do with a bit of extra pocket money. This year, there are 3 prizes. First prize is 100,000 Rand. Second prize is 25,000 Rand. And third prize is 10,000 Rand. For only 500 Rand a ticket, you have 3 chances to win. And there are only 1,000 tickets available, and they're already going fast. So purchase yours now to avoid missing out. Join BirdLife South Africa for one of the biggest events in African birding this year, the African Bird Fair 2022. This year, we're hosting a hybrid event, meaning the entire program will be available virtually, but you're also welcome to join us in person at our head office, Isdale House in Dunkeld, West Johannesburg. Be sure to diarize 22 and 23 July to enjoy an epic lineup of speakers, exhibitors, and workshops, and the opportunity to connect with other avid birders across the continent and the world. The registration link is coming soon, and for more information on keynote speakers, workshops, and lectures, you can find all of this information at BirdLife South Africa's website. I'll also be hosting one of the workshops on grassland birds, so be sure to sign up if you're keen on cracking those LBJs. But finally, onto our main event. Dr. Robert Thompson has been an avid bird enthusiast from a young age and pursued his passion all the way to Finland, where he spent the better part of his early academic career. Rob joined the FITS at UCT in 2015 and is now an associate professor there, with a wide range of interesting and diverse research topics covering interspecies relationships and applied ecology for bird conservation. Rob also heads up the saffering program and enjoys atlasing in his free time. Rob, we are so looking forward to learning about your incredible work in the Kalahari tonight. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Finland, and I'm now going to ask you to please share your screen with all of us.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. And yeah, thanks for joining us to listen today. I hope you can see those slides all right.
We can. Thanks, Rob. Over to you.
Okay, I'm going to, I think, try and leave my webcam on so you can see a face, the face that's talking to you. I think if you put it on your top right-hand corner, I hope most of my slides are organized in a way that shouldn't cover anything important in that. So yes, I'm going to speak to you today about basically Hotel Kalahari and, of course, these sociable weaver nests, and then have a little cameo from Africa's smallest falcon, the Pygmy Falcon. And this is a project I started 11 years ago. 11 years ago. So it's quite been a long-term project that we've been had going on. So yeah, the story, I guess, obviously starts with these sociable weavers. You know, they're brown birds. I wouldn't quite consider them LBJs, but yeah, perhaps not much to look at, although I think they're pretty special. They special in their behaviors, of course, you know, being these sociable weavers, being very sociable, forming these huge colonies and their interactions. And there's a lot of research being done on the species. So yeah, that would be, I think, enough material for several of these webinars. But yeah, I'm not going to deal with them much today. Mostly what I'm interested with these sociable weavers is what they build, which is these incredible structures. So we know that animals are master builders, but I think the sociable weavers probably have some sort of claim to being the masters of the masters. So they build these massive haystack colonies, essentially these nest colonies. So this colony here, I would estimate maybe as about 100 chambers. So the chambers, if you stood below one of these colonies, you know that the chambers actually point downwards. They're individual chambers that make up these colonies, and it can vary anything from 1 or 2 chambers to several hundred. So 200-300 chambers is possible as well, even bigger perhaps. And a colony like this with about 100 chambers would have over 200 individuals living in this nest mass. And the idea and the ideas that we've been exploring on this system is essentially that these sociable weavers are ecological engineers. You know, they create in this environment, they build in the structure, and this changes both the biotic and abiotic environment. They change resources around these nests, etc. And basically, we're trying to show and understand their impact on this Kalahari ecosystem. And one of the key things of these nests, which has been known for quite many years, for decades already, is this impact on temperature buffering. So we've played around with this as well. You put little temperature loggers inside one of these chambers, and you put a temperature logger outside, and you can see just how buffered the environment is inside these nests. So on a cold winter's night like tonight, you know, that I think the inside the chambers is a good 10 degrees warmer than the ambient temperature. And if you're a small bird in the Kalahari winter, you know, that can be -5, -6 degrees, that's an incredibly important energy saving. And then similarly in the summer, actually the temperatures are a lot cooler in these nests. And I think it's for that reason that so many other animal species actually want to use these nests. Okay, so I thought just before I get started properly, I just wanted to acknowledge the team that's been working on this with me over the years. So yeah, it's a bunch of students and postdocs and collaborators, and they've all contributed in various ways to this project over the last 10, 11 years. Also a lot of funders. Actually, the beginning of this project was actually funded by the Academy of Finland, and then since then the National Research Foundation. and then with a lot of support from Tualu Foundation as well. And then we now incorporated into this bigger key project, which is several projects from different universities, and we're working on the system together. Also, the photos in this presentation I've gleaned from various collaborators and that, and I've tried to acknowledge everybody's photos, but where there's maybe not an acknowledgement, it's probably Anthony Lowney's photos. He's holding the Pygmy Falcon here in the middle in the grey sweater. So yeah, the photos, of course, are very important for a presentation like this. Okay, so we've done most of our work on Tualu, and Tualu Kalahari, the reserve, is situated here. It's quite close to the Botswana border. The nearest town, I guess, is Hot as Hell, the mining town, which is about 70, 80 kilometers away from Tualu. And just for some context, Tualu is quite unique. It's obviously a Kalahari savanna, but this is looking towards the east from basically the core of the study area. You can see there's this mountain range that comes into Tualu. It runs in a north-south direction, the Coronaberg, and that's actually, it's quite unique for the Kalahari, I think, to have this mountain coming into the Kalahari, and the vegetation is almost Karoo type vegetation. So it creates a bit more diversity, and I think probably because of this mountain range, the concentrations and the densities of both maybe sociable weaver colonies and perhaps the Pygmy Falcons is quite high in this area, I think. So this is looking west. But if you look east from almost the same spot, this is taken maybe from 500 meters away. This is looking now towards the west. So Tualu also has these red dunes, and from here on the westwards, you get these rolling red dunes. And here's Femi looking at the nests. So yeah, we wanted to understand, what uses these nests. We know that they provide these buffered environments. We assume there's a lot of resources there. So we wanted to look at what's going on. And one of the first things we do is to understand, what's using these chambers. We realized very quickly that you can actually wait till it's fully dark. You go like 9 o'clock or so, and you quietly stand under these nests and look up, and you can actually document what species are occupying different chambers. So you get a good idea of if it's only sociable weavers or some other species. And of course, most of the chambers you look at have got sociable weavers looking down at you. But every now and again, you get something like this, which is, of course, an acacia pied barbet. And these birds are incredibly common in these sociable weaver nests at night. So they don't breed in the nests, but they use it for roosting. And yeah, we've got some colonies, some of the bigger colonies, which will have 8 or 10 acacia pied barbets actually using these nests for roosting. And already there, I think if you spend some time around these nests, you would see the conflict already there between the weavers and the barbets. The barbets are trying to access these chambers, and the weavers who are maintaining certain chambers are trying to keep the barbets out, and they're fighting, and other barbets are sneaking into chambers, etc. So there's already, it's a pretty clear indication to me that these nests are a very important resource to many birds in these Kalahari communities, that they're really fighting about access to these chambers. So yeah, perhaps acacia pied barbets are the most common users of these colonies, but there's a range of species that do use these nests. Yeah, in the top left of your screens is a spotted eagle owl. So there's a lot of owls and other raptors that breed on top of these nests. We also have barn owls breeding in some larger cavities, and then you've probably seen pictures online of the rose eagles, even using these pale chanting goshawks, etc. Two other species that only roost in the nests are the acacia tit and the scaly feathered finch. So they also use these nests, but they don't actually breed in the nests. And then these other 3 species, the lovebirds, not occurring in Tualu, but further up, well, a bit further west actually from Tualu, around the Kenhardt area already, you start getting lovebirds in sociable weaver nests, and then up into Namibia. And I think the sociable weaver nests are a very important nesting site for the rosy-faced lovebirds. And then also red-headed finches quite commonly breed in chambers in these sociable weaver nests. And then of course the Pygmy Falcon, which I'll speak about a lot later. And we've looked at the different nest characteristics and how that determines, how many different species are used in these nests. And I mean, there's a lot of things we found, but some of the general kind of ideas is, of course, the larger the nest, the more different, the greater diversity of species are used in these nests. But also the higher the weaver nest colonies, they seem to be maybe thought of as slightly safer. There seems to be more individuals using these nests. And then aspects such as isolation. So if there's a very isolated sociable weaver nest, I guess it's a more scarce resource if you start having more other individuals using these nests. Okay. Yeah, this is a nice little picture of the scaly feathered finches. So they are weavers themselves, and they do build their own little flimsy weaving structures. But yeah, they usually occupy external chambers which aren't very well maintained, and they usually pack themselves in there, especially on cold winter nights. I think this is a really important resource to them. And yeah, very cute birds that persist in these colonies as well. Okay, and then yeah, there's some invertebrates which are very special to these colonies. This is not something I know all that much about, but literature we found, and that there's the pseudoscorpion and a certain cockroach species, which, as far as we understand, are actually endemic invertebrates to sociable weaver colonies. So they've never been found anywhere else. So they're identified from these colonies, and they seem to be endemic to these colonies. So quite special environments that these colonies create in the deserts, and all the resources they provide. And the cockroaches, of course, there's a lot of feces associated with the sociable weaver colonies in general. And I think I've seen them, moving around when we're doing these spotlight checks. They're moving around the nests and that and feeding. And then, yeah, of course, reptiles are an important part of the system as well. One of the earlier little studies we did was with Kalahari tree skinks. That's in a small arboreal lizard, looks very similar to your house skink, but they occur in the Kalahari, and especially on trees. And if you compare, counts of skinks or sampled counts of skinks on trees with and without nests, actually skinks are about 2 or 3 times more abundant on these big camel thorns with the nests compared to similar sized camel thorns without nests. So they seem to be really attracted to the trees that actually have these sociable weaver nests. And I'll speak a bit more about the skinks later on, but yeah, they seem to be really attracted to sociable weaver nests as well. And then, yeah, the snake aspect of sociable weaver nests is an important one. I think that's probably quite legendary that, if you want to see a snake, it's probably a good place to go look in, especially during the breeding season, looking for at these colonies. So this is obviously a worm-slung, very common in these nests, especially in the summer. And they forage through these colonies. Yeah, you can see a colony from below with the chambers facing down, and they anchor themselves in one chamber move. You can actually see some weavers coming into the chambers above as well. So they don't just kind of mob. They just carry on about their business. And as you saw, yeah, if you want to walk below these nests and there's a worm slung, be very careful, because especially the worm slung do often drop from the nest. So it's not something you should, yeah, be very careful anyway when you're doing it. So luckily this was just a camera on a tripod looking up, and it happened to catch this worm slung foraging. And then, yeah, so with our students, of course, so the whole research team, we're very mindful of snakes. We're not exactly snake people. We have a protocol where we, before we working on nests, before we start trapping birds or doing something, measuring aspects, we do a walk around to make sure there's no snakes around, and it's not always that obvious. So I assume most of you have spotted the cobra in the nest, but yeah, they can be quite inconspicuous at times, and it's not something that my group generally enjoys. There's a few members which are enjoying the snake side of things, but most of us are not really snake people. So luckily we do have great collaborators from University of the Western Cape, Dr. Brian Moritz, who's working on cobras especially, but also worm slung, and looking at their foraging and use of sociable weaver nests. So we have somebody taking care of that side of the system. So we don't have to play with it too much, luckily. Yeah, so the general kind of setup that we've done for much of the studies is to have this kind of comparison. So we have 2 trees which are in the same area of the reserve, and they're similar size and shape, and of course the same species, but the one then has a sociable weaver nest and the other one doesn't. We try to compare the diversity and the activity of animals at these different trees to see what does the sociable weaver nest add to the tree, and what does it cause in terms of creating this resource, etc. So just keep that in mind as I present some of the results here. So of course, we put these camera traps at a distance away from these nests to try and see the activity, and we're actually recording significantly more animal activity and animal use of these nests when there's of these trees when there's a sociable weaver nest in it. So of course, shade is very important in the summer as well, when it gets really hot in the Kalahari. So you have a lot of antelope and other species going to these, specifically these nest trees to get shade. Of course, the camel thorns provide a lot of shade, but if you put a whopping big sociable weaver nest in the tree as well, of course, the shade is quite solid and very good. And they can spend a lot of time under these trees getting this benefit. There's also several animals that during the daytime forage at these nests, so we capture a lot of activity in that way. This is a baboon feeding on something. I'm not quite sure what it was, maybe trying to access a weaver nest. But yeah, some species definitely trying to use the nest as a food resource of some sorts. So these are the ground cameras, and already there's a lot of evidence about a lot of activity, much more activity below these trees with a nest than without. But we also put some cameras in the trees to get an idea of the arboreal kind of mammals and that what's going on. And actually there the results were quite extreme in that in our sample, of course, it's always just a sample. The trees with nests actually had basically all the camera trap events. So they were capturing all the animals moving through these trees. So in the Kalahari, if you're looking for, for some nocturnal animals, this includes the genets, the African wildcats, etc. Most of them are foraging and using these trees that contain the sociable weaver nest. So this was quite a dramatic result of a lot of animal activity in the trees when there's a nest. The cheetahs and toile have become, I think, relatively famous now for behaving a bit like leopards, especially in these trees with a nest. So there's a lot of cheetahs often sitting on these nests. And this is just one example, but yeah, there's several photos that exist. This is another, I think it's a pair of brothers that hunt in one part of the reserve, and they are often sitting on top of these nests. And we've got some really incredible camera trap footage where a mother and her 3 teenage cubs actually climb onto one of these nests. So there's a small sociable weaver colony, but 4 cheetahs sitting on top of this colony. So yeah, so they use it a lot. And these predators are also using these trees with a nest as marking posts. They seem to be kind of centers of information as well. So those seem to be the trees that are picking up the scent marking of many of the predators. So maybe they're some conspicuous feature of this landscape. And then for that reason, the predators kind of attract to them. And then, of course, leopards as well are using, we're finding some carcasses above these nests as well. This is a leopard cub that was left by its mother, and I think just sleeping on top of the nest. We've actually have a sequence of videos where Anthony's coming to do his night checks with his headlamp, and about 5 minutes before the camera trap actually picks up a leopard climbing a tree. And then Anthony arriving 5 minutes later. There's no evidence of the leopard actually leaving the tree, but yeah, we wonder if the leopard was just above the sociable weaver nest while Anthony was determining the chamber occupancy below. Okay. So basically a lot of animals are attracted to these nests, but because of this kind of attraction of animals and the presence of the weaver nests, we've also been looking at the kind of nutrient aspects of this. So you can see on the photo here below Tim and Femi, just the amount of feces. And if you've, on the ground, and if you've been at one of these nests, you'll know that how much feces is deposited there, both from the birds, but also other sources like all these mammals that are arriving. So we've been looking at the ability of these weavers to kind of import nutrients from the surrounding landscape and actually deposit them all below these trees, and looking at the consequences of this for the host trees and the surrounding vegetation. So this is still a work in process, but But of course, the soil sampling that we've done has been quite very clear in this respect. So here you have just the concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus for nest trees, control trees, that's trees without nests, and then just the grassland site in between. And you'll see this massive spike in these nutrient values underneath the trees, of course, and in the vicinity of these trees. So there's massive nutrient input. And we also know that the trees, even these adult trees, are using that nutrient. We've got signals of the isotope values of nitrogen going into these trees. So they actually are absorbing this nutrients that the weavers are bringing in. We've done some experiments where we grow camel thorns and other plants in these soils, and here's one of Tim's experiments now with camel thorn seedlings growing in different soils. So the 50N is the nest tree, and then you have the control tree and the grassland side, and you can just see how much better the trees performing in the nest soil, in the soils that are below the nest tree. And this is also translated in the adult trees to leafiness. So we've got quite a clear signal of increased leafiness in these camel thorns that host in sociable weavers, whether that's all nutrient input that they can use, or whether it's some sort of compensation, because there is, of course, a massive loss in foliar area as well by these trees. So it might be a bit of both, but definitely the trees are showing some different signs when they host in a sociable weaver nest. And then this again has impacts on the animal community. So one of Anthony's results is that the giraffes are visiting these trees a lot more on Tswalu, but they also spend a lot more time foraging on the trees with the weaver nests compared to trees without weaver nests. So it might make sense, there's more kind of nutrient per bite for these giraffes. But we're still working on this costs and this benefits to the trees of hosting these nests. Of course, you can see here in the picture this broken branch, which was no doubt had a big section of nest. If you've been to these nests, you know that the trees suffer quite heavy breakage of their branches, because especially after rainstorms, when these nests are very heavy and the wind blows, big branches break. So this cost-benefit trade-off, or this interaction, we're not quite sure what the final result is, but there's definitely some interesting questions to ask there, and it's something we are exploring at the moment. So we've also been interested, so we've done a lot of our work at soil at Kalahari, but we've been interested in how all this changes across the range. So we have sites from Bemfontein in Kimberley, where the Sociable Weaver project is actually based, as a long-term 4-decade study. And we sampled sites all the way up close into the Namib Desert, trying to get a handle of how aridity, so it was an aridity gradient, how when the environment is more arid or less arid, how that changes the importance of these nests. So essentially you have something like this around Tswalu, where it's more like a grassland Kalahari savanna. Of course, it doesn't have huge amounts of rain, but it does still have some rain. And this goes to the extremes in Namibia, where you really have very little vegetation, and you still have these trees, these camel thorn trees with the nests. And actually we found that as the sites get more arid and more harsh, the relative importance of these weaver nests actually increases. So comparatively, if you're comparing these trees with a nest to trees without nests in these very arid sites, they're maintaining much higher diversity of animals in these sites. So I think it's pretty good evidence again that these weaver nests are buffering the environment. They changing the resources and making it possible for the biodiversity to kind of persist a bit longer, even though these environments are very harsh. So they might have a role under climate change, a very important role in making the environment a bit less harsh and ameliorating these conditions. Okay, so that's so we think it's quite important. And then of course one of the stars of the show in these nests, and it's the species, I think when I started working on the system, it's actually the one I wanted to mainly focus on, were the Pygmy Falcons, of course. So the Pygmy Falcons are very charismatic species. They are in the southern African part of their range. So there's two subspecies, the one we have in the Kalahari, and then there's another subspecies in East Africa. But the southern African subspecies is completely obligately using the sociable weaver nest. So there's some reports of them using other structures, but I think it's quite clear now. And Dieter has a new paper showing that this connection is very, very close. So the weavers are really dependent on the falcons are really dependent on these sociable weaver nests. And amazingly, when I started the study, it became clear that there's actually only one real data study on pygmy falcons. There's of course some observational studies on the species, but only McLean, who studied the population in the Kalahari National Park, has actually looked at the species. So it's got a lot of unique things to find out. And I think because of their role in these nests, because they're such close associates of the weavers, I think they have a very important role in the system, and understanding their demography and their life history is really important. So something we know, for example, of these falcons is that they prefer bigger nests. So the bigger the sociable weaver nest, the more likely it's going to be occupied by a falcon. They don't like very, very small nests. It might be that there's better thermal benefits or something in these larger nests, but that's quite clear. A very unique aspect of these falcons is that when they occupy a chamber, they defecate at the chamber entrance. So you have this like fecal mat at their chambers, and it obviously makes it very easy for us to survey our 350 sociable weaver colonies and find out, where the falcons are active this year, because you can see when it's fresh feces. So it's a nice little part of their behavior, and it makes it easy for us. But of course, the question arises: why do they do this? There's similar falconets throughout the world, and I don't think other falconets do this. So it's quite interesting behavior, and we've basically been asking this question: why do they put the feces mats at their entrances? We've got a whole bunch of hypotheses. We've only tested 3 at the moment. So we've looked at the antibacterial and antifungal properties to see if they maybe benefit the falcons in that way. Of course, these nests, they're occupied year-round by the weavers and all these other species. So the parasite loads and all this in these nests is probably quite high. But we found no role of the feces in this. And we've also looked at the temperature benefits of having this white feces at the entrance hole. So architects will tell you, if you build in a building in a very hot environment, the entrance should be white, and it should keep the building cooler. And we've investigated this, but there's no clear signal that this species changes the temperature in these chambers much. So yeah, we have these other hypotheses. We'll get to them eventually as we continue working on the system, and hopefully we will find out why these falcons put the species there. Maybe my gut feeling of one that might be useful is when you put your hand into these chambers, you get like this fine dust. It's like a white powder that covers your hand. So I feel that maybe it's kind of like a dust bathing of some sorts. As they go in and out, they coat their feathers, and maybe that helps with ectoparasite load. So that's my gut feeling, but we'll have to test it and see if that's actually the case. Another feature, actually, there's not only one of these fecal mat chambers per nest. So people might stand below nests and you might see, 3, 4, 5 of these, and that's different members of the same group basically using different chambers. It's not each one is a nest. Sometimes they use it just for roosting and that, but there can be multiple of these marked chambers per sociable weaver colony. Yeah, and then of course they nest in these as well. And this is how it looks. And of course, we spoke about the snakes and that they predate these nests. They go up there. So of course the falcons are susceptible to these snakes as well. And one of the thoughts was this interactions between the weavers and the falcons, and the weavers host these falcons, is that perhaps these falcons can protect the weavers from the snakes. So these Cape Cobras, they come in, and we wanted to test if falcons actually can protect the colonies from foraging snakes. And we've done some experiments and seen something very similar to this. So here you have a Cape Cobra arriving at a colony, foraging. You'll see the weavers kind of hang around, but they're quite powerless. But yeah, the falcons come and they hit the net. They often, we've seen this where they hit the snakes and other predators too. So they are able to to protect the weaver nests to some extent from these predators, which should have a benefit for the weavers. Yeah, these falcons, of course, are small. They're about 50 to 60 grams, so they're smaller than your garden thrush, your olive thrush, or your Karoo thrush, depending on where you are. But yeah, the one caveat with the protection is that the falcons will only protect the nest when they're breeding themselves. So, you know, if they have a breeding period of a month and a half or 2 months, that's the only time when they're effectively providing that protection. The rest of the time, they're not going to invest themselves in bombing Cape Cobras, you know, if they don't have their own chicks in the nest, for example. But we investigated weaver nesting success, thinking that, you know, we might find a signal of increased weaver nesting success when the falcons are present in these nests. But we actually found exactly the opposite, that when the falcons were in a colony, actually weaver nesting success decreased quite a lot, despite the fact that we did detect less snakes on these nests because they were keeping them away. And we know they are very aggressive. So yes, Femi getting bombed by a female at one of our colonies. So when you work on these nests, the weavers tell you as well that the falcons are about to bomb you, and they're quite aggressive. And I think this is a female, which I think is the oldest bird in our population, which is, she's 10, 11 years old now. So yeah, she's the old lady. Of course, that's as long as the study. So we'll see how long she persists. But yeah, we wanted to know why is there lower weaver nesting success when there's falcons? So here's a falcon at its colony. You can see the weavers going a bit crazy, and the falcon goes away. And of course, what's happening is actually the falcons are taking the weaver chicks. So this is something which we think is incredibly common, actually. Yeah, there's a lot of anecdotal literature that does happen, but people thought it's probably quite rare. But we actually think this is very common. And when we had the BBC out filming this is something they did regularly. Basically, they could just visit the next chambers if the weavers are breeding and remove chicks. So yeah, so we think they are responsible for this low breeding success. So this interaction between the weavers and the falcons is, again, a fascinating one. There's definitely some positive sides of that interaction, the protection, but then yeah, the falcons are quite nasty in that they will predate the weaver nests. And this is an incredible picture by Willem Kruger that kind of captures this. So yeah. And then yeah, to return to the skinks as well, the skinks have the same dilemma. So the falcons eat a lot of small lizards. The skinks love these weaver nests. So how do they manage this risk? And we've actually done a study where we've played the alarm calls of the weavers to the skinks, and they actually do eavesdrop on weaver alarm calls and make anti-predator decisions based on that. So the skinks are far more likely to forage away from the tree when the weavers are around, because they have this like early warning system. And when the weavers give their alarm call, which they always do when the falcons come close, the skinks can basically do their escape behavior and get into cover. So yeah, very interesting again. It seems that they are actually able to expand their foraging when the weavers are present, because they have this early alarm system. Although of course some of them still do fall victim to the falcons. So the falcons, of course, the sexes are not the same. You have the female on the left with this like reddish brown back, and the male on the other side with the gray back. So there's been speculation about them being polyandrous, like your painted snipe or something like that. So you have the more colorful female, and that she will have multiple males. And there are also observations of multiple males copulating with a female on the same branch. So we were really interested in looking at this grouping behavior and their social breeding system. That involves a lot of early mornings catching. We usually catch just before sunrise, and it can be nice and targeted, only targeting the falcons. So yeah, we know who we're dealing with, and we've basically been working on this whole population and knowing every individual in the population, and putting colorings on these individuals so we can identify them easily. So we know exactly who we deal. We also don't have to catch them again, because with the colorings, you know who's nesting where. etc. So we have this individually marked population. We've monitored over the years about 400 active territories and over 350 nests of Pygmy Falcons. So we have a huge amount of data which we're busy writing up at the moment. And we bring 700 birds. 75% of these are chicks. So some of them we see again. We're still working on calculating like overwinter survival and that. But we have a large data set to really understand what's going on with these birds. But yeah, the territorial behavior is quite interesting. This is an example of, we actually knew the identity of these birds because they were ringed. So these birds in the picture are fighting. They were actually still alive at this point. The team found them like on the ground struggling, had this big fight. And one of the males actually was found dead below the nest the next day. So we actually know that the one male lost his female, perhaps due to a snake predation event or something, moved into the neighboring territory and actually killed the local male in that territory who had a nest already. And then this intruder male, he then kind of he got the colony and the lady, and then they bred later that season as well. So it's an example of an actual an aggressive interaction which actually resulted in attaining a mate. And they breed on average the nests are about 1.2 kilometers apart. That really depends on the kind of system. If it's a drier dune system, I think it might be further, but up against the Coronaberg, the nests are about 350 meters apart at their closest. So they can be quite close together. We've done some monitoring with GPSs. This is also in its infancy, but you can see that the territory size during the breeding events, at least, is not very big. It's about 600 meters across at most, but probably a core area of only 200-300 meters where the birds are foraging. Another example, and this example is actually that male that killed the other male and got the territory. So he existed. These trees are colonies, these numbers. So this male was from colony 6 originally and moved to colony 1 where he got the female. And anyway, that's kind of where he moved around. But quite interestingly, you can see all the waypoints on the mountain. So we have seen this before, but this was nice to get this movement data that we can actually see the birds close to the Coronaberg are actually flying up to the top of the mountain. And we think they're hunting lizards up on these rocky mountains over there. So it's very interesting, something we still have to look more closely at. But yeah, of course, we've been following about 350 nests already, carefully, ringing all the chicks, understanding their reproductive output and how this changes over the years. It's an arid system, so it's quite interesting to see what drives the reproduction and the timing of the reproduction, etc. So we do, quite detailed measurements. There's Femi's been working on this for the last few years, quite hectic field seasons, following about between 30 and 35 nests per season. So essentially, what we found to date is that about 65% of the nests are initiated in September, October. Even more if you consider a little of the few in August, which is quite surprising because the rains in the Kalahari generally only come a bit later. And the weavers would generally breed, if the rains haven't come, the weavers would start a bit later. But anyway, most of the falcon nests are starting quite early in the spring, as soon as those very cold Kalahari winds stop. And actually the earlier breeders have the highest nest success. And there's a very clear seasonal decline. So the later the nests, the poorer they do on average. So it's something it's actually quite surprising because the later nests are generally hitting the peak of the rainy season. We have some pairs, not very often, but some pairs will double brood in a single summer. But I think we only have a handful of those, maybe 4 or 5 occasions where a pair has actually raised two broods in a single season. And as expected, there's very high between-year variation in their success. I mean, that's in a desert system, I guess you'd expect that. But we're now looking at what drives this exactly. Of course, the big suspect is rainfall, etc. But this is something we're going to look at and try to understand a bit better. The Kalahari has just been through this terrible drought, and we saw numbers seem to decline quite a lot, but now the last few years have been very wet again, and everything is picking up. Yeah, and then the last aspect of these very fascinating birds is, even in the early season, you might go and visit one of these colonies that are hosting Pygmy Falcons, and you'll see, oh, there's 4 adults in the nest, in the tree at the nest. So I mentioned to you that there's some suspicion that they might be polyandrous. So we wanted to look at this group composition, what's making up these falcon groups, and how common are these groups, because they definitely, not every nest has a group associated with them. So we basically asked the question of what kinds of groups they are, and we were using all this ringing data that we had, and this is something we published a few years ago, so it's on a slightly smaller sample size, but we followed 185 falcon nests, and out of those, about 80% just had a pair of adults, so 2 birds, a normal male and female, raising their chicks. But then, 22% of the nests actually had these groups of adults, and these groups actually were comprised of basically all possibilities. So by the way, you can obviously see what's a female and what's a male. The female has the red back. So about 73% of the groups were 1 female with multiple males. About 18% was 1 male with multiple females. And then 9% of these groups were multi-male, multi-female groups. So it's quite interesting. There's kind of a diversity of these groups. So we really need to figure out what's actually still going on there. And we looked at these groups, we looked at the origin of the individuals in these groups, and basically we showed, which is quite rare in raptors, that a lot of the groups are actually the pair being joined by their delayed offspring. So these are offspring from the previous year. Sometimes they stay 2 years, very rarely, but sometimes they stay with their parents for 2 years, and they're helping their parents raise subsequent broods in the successive years. And that was in about 35% of cases. And of course, there you wouldn't expect polyandry in that case, because it's offspring of the pair. But we also, slightly more common was the pair with an immigrant. So this was an unrelated individual coming from outside the study area and joining the pair. So that was happening. And then of course, because they're Pygmy Falcons, they also did this combination of the two. So you had 22% of these groups had both delayed offspring and immigrants that were helping the pair. So this is the social system that we've kind of described, but we have blood samples from every individual. So we really need to look at the genetic mating system to really see, what males or who's siring the offspring in these nests, and trying to figure out exactly what's going on in the system in that way. So the consequences of this group breeding, not that clear. We haven't found any clear benefits to breeding success in terms of the number of offspring raised or the timing. The one benefit was that with a slightly bigger broods of 3, so the maximum brood size is 3 chicks. When there was a group raising 3 chicks, those chicks on average were a bit better quality, so heavier relative to their size compared to 3 chicks being raised by only two adults. So that's the only signal we found with that there seems to be a benefit to the reproduction. But of course, the individuals involved in the groups may be waiting for good territories. If they delayed offspring, they're actually helping raise their siblings, so they still get this genetic benefit. But it's something we still want to explore a bit more. It's a very fascinating system overall. So that's basically it. The falcons, we've rung a lot. They're happy. The workday, if you're in the falcon ringing season, the workday basically ends as the sun is rising. So then you have the rest of the day to enjoy the Kalahari. And thank you very much for listening.
Wow, Rob, that was absolutely phenomenal. And thank you for including such incredible photographs. I see Ant is in the audience this evening. So certainly,
and everybody else.
Absolutely. Great to see all your students coming in and supporting you. Sure, I have always adored Pygmy Falcons. I think you have just raised my love for these gorgeous little raptors even more. That was brilliant, Rob. Thank you for sharing your incredible insights with us tonight. And I'm sure you're seeing all the clapping hands and thumbs up and hearts coming through on the reactions buttons there. It looks like our audience really enjoyed that as well. Before we dive into some of the questions, and we've certainly got a number here firing through. If anybody has any questions, remember you can pop those into the Q&A box. But just a reminder, as you exit tonight's webinar, you will be presented with a post-webinar survey. Let us know what you thought of the show, and if you have any comments about what was presented this evening. And next week, for our 100th episode of Conservation Conversations, we will be hosting the Mouse Free Marion Project team as they celebrate World Albatross Day, possibly one of the most ambitious projects BirdLife South Africa has been involved in, clearing mice from Marion Island. And we're certainly looking forward to that webinar next week. But Rob, back to you and these incredible little falcons.
Yes.
Sure, where do we start? There are so many questions flying in. I'm going to start with a relatively easy one, being a tree ecologist myself, and I don't know if you'll have an exact answer, but what are the lifespans of these camel thorn trees on average, and how often do they fall over from old age?
So, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. These, I mean, they get very old. I would say well over 100 years. We know that the colonies exist in some of these trees for several decades. So, I mean, the ones followed in Benfontein, those have been going for already 40 years. And from some historical photographs and that, I mean, you know, weaver colonies have been in the same tree for 50, 60 years, perhaps. So I think camel thorns get extremely old. They're very slow growing species. So very, very slow growing species. So I think, yeah, very, very old.
Fantastic. And certainly that nutrient deposition will help with that recruitment of future camel thorns. But as you say, they hang around quite a while, so hopefully not as needed.
Yeah.
And Henny asked the question, have you been able to tease apart any reasons as to why you have your control trees without nests and essentially being ignored by these weavers versus trees with nests?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. I guess there's only so many resources in the environment. I mean, we do have a slight, you know, we select these control trees, but on average, the weavers are taking the bigger trees in the environment. So it might be the fact that some of these trees are slightly smaller, but we have had occasions where there's a lightning strike on a colony, or a fire comes through, and the weavers will immediately build in a new tree that, you know, hasn't contained one. So it's obviously suitable. I think it's basically there's only so many resources. The weavers on average do a little bit better with bigger colonies. So there's probably a few brave weaver souls that start new colonies, but there is some dynamic in that, but there's not huge amounts of dispersal in the species. So they generally try to make, if there's space, they try to make the nest bigger and bigger. And then, yeah, if the colony is very successful, if there's water and if there's not a dry cycle, because as soon as there's dry cycles, there's no grass to build and that, then the colony shrinks. But I think if the colonies expand, you do start seeing these clusters around. So I think most of these trees are suitable. Why they choose the one specific one, it's something very difficult to study, actually. But
maybe something for the LiDAR wielding, data crunching people to come and check out for us. Moving away from the trees, Alan Taylor was asking, one often notices these nests on telephone poles, and I know you've been involved in some of the electric crow work. Can you tell us a little bit about these electric weavers and why we see them taking over these telephone poles occasionally?
Yeah, I mean, they're very opportunistic, of course. So they struggle sometimes, but if there's enough kind of anchorage places on these poles, they seem to be, I mean, if you've driven through the Northern Cape, you've seen it, just pole after pole. And I mean, those sites are generally limited, by the size of the nest that they can support. But yeah, they like it. I think those pole nests are particularly good because I think the snakes struggle to climb up these vertical telephone poles. So it might be in that, but of course I think, I guess it helps them to maybe get into areas which don't have suitable trees. So, and there's these road verges obviously have a lot of growth. So I think those are quite productive sites. There's some new big pylons going up near Groblersdal. Me and Anthony have popped in some, there's these absolutely massive sociable weaver nests. I don't know, we can't even, there's like, it's not only a hotel, it's a hotel of 20 stories. They just layer of layer, and you can't even count the number of chambers, but I think there must be 600, 700, 800 chambers in his map, because they built in the top of these pylons. So yeah, I mean, that's 1,000 sociable weavers, and they love it. And I think they're completely safe from snakes. Maybe they for sure going to have a Pygmy Falcon join them at some point, but yeah, I think that's probably part of the attraction of those sites. And they're very, they nest in larpers and everything. So when they see a possibility, they seem to use it.
Absolutely. I remember coming across a very small colony in a quiver tree out in the Kalahari region, which was super interesting to see. And I think that probably answers George Ledec's question, asking, can you recommend an easily accessible, convenient site near a major road for seeing sociable weavers? What would you say, Rob?
Cool. Yeah, everywhere.
Just drive the Northern Cape.
yeah. I don't know, it depends where you're based, but if you're coming up from Cape Town, I think between Brunfley and Kenhardt it starts and it just doesn't stop. And yeah, I don't know, from Joburg side, I think they seem to be getting a bit thin on the ground in the northwest, but at some point you'll just enter the range and then it seems to be quite full on. If you want to see these fancy ones where they're in the quiver trees, yeah, then it's a bit more tricky. There are some sites, but I think Namibia is probably the best place to go and see the nests in the quiver trees, which are special to see. It's kind of a whole different thing, and we'd love to work on those. I know, I mean, that's where the lovebirds are, so it's something we'd desperately like to have a small study site looking at lovebirds and how they use, because there's this hierarchy, of all these associates as well, and yeah, we know the falcon seems to be the top boss, and barbets and weavers tend to fight, and then the finches kind of take what's left over, but lovebirds we haven't worked with, so I'd be really interested to know, if the lovebirds are kind of dominant over the weavers. Do they take whatever chamber they want, or is what's the dynamic there? And I think for that, you'd need to go up into Namibia and get those nice quiver tree forests and have a look there.
Definitely. Well, we look forward to getting you back on the show in the future to tell us about that study, because I hope you get it done. If I know anything about parrots, they are pretty feisty, and certainly I think they'll be one of your top dogs in that colony for sure.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Yeah.
Now, Rob, you mentioned these sort of behemoth nests. Has there been any studies looking at the total weight of these nests? Have you guys been able to try and quantify that and sort of breaking points that these acacias can handle?
No, I mean, I'm gonna lie if I say, but no. I mean, they're heavy. How heavy they get, I don't know. I think the breakage often happens after these storms. They get waterlogged. I mean, of course, the water runs off, but I think that they become pretty heavy, and then when the wind blows, it's the breakage occurs. But I mean, some of the branches we've seen broken by these nests are massive, thick, and camel thorns especially. It's a hardwood. It's not the botanists, I've never tried, but to do a core in a camel thorn tree, apparently you should take like 10 cores or these like drills into the field, because you're going to break it if you try and core and find out how old a camel thorn is. So it's incredibly hard wood. So I think it requires a very, very heavy structure to break it.
Absolutely. And those camel thorn trees are certainly wonderful trees to study with my botanical background. But in terms of where the falcons are roosting and breeding, you mentioned that they seem to almost be exclusively using the sociable weaver nest. Do they have any other sorts of breeding sites? And that's from Letitia Steinberg.
So no, I mean, there's in the literature, you'll see some of the older bird books have Pygmy Falcons up in northern Kruger and that, but we think, that's not the case anymore. So I think there's been 1 or 2 occasions around Tswalu as well, where maybe it's individuals dispersing have been seen in sparrow weaver nests, but that would just be for the night, just maybe in desperation if there's no weaver nest around or sociable weaver nest around, them to jump into a sparrow weaver nest. But from what we can tell and from the historical documents which Tito Shadlius has gone through, it seems to be quite clear that they're pretty exclusively in the sociable weaver nests. Of course, what's going on in East Africa is a bit more uncertain. There they seem to be targeting white-headed buffalo weaver nests, but there's a few other sociable weavers there. So I'm not sure if the East African population is as tightly connected to the buffalo weavers as our population is to the sociable weavers. And that's another I shouldn't give all my ideas away,
All
but
branches,
that we
Daddy.
definitely want to go. And I think that the dynamics in the East African population will be a bit different as well, because I think a buffalo weaver is a bit more feisty as well than a sociable weaver. So I don't think the falcons will have their way in these buffalo weaver colonies. So it might be, it might be actually a very different kind of system actually. So yeah, it'd be very interesting. But yeah, in our region, it's sociable weavers. If you want to see a pygmy falcon, definitely don't go sitting around mast weavers or sparrow weavers. Go and sit at a sociable weaver nest. Yeah.
Absolutely. And mentioning East Africa, I know that isn't quite where your virtual background's from. We've got a question asking where your awesome virtual background is taken. If you would mind just telling everyone, please.
Yeah, I'm going to make you jealous, but it's from the Sahel region in Chad. So Eastern Chad, quite close to the Libyan border. It's beautiful. It's not my picture again, but I have been to the area. Straight after the rainy season. Very beautiful.
Jealous indeed.
I like deserts, I guess.
well, we'll bring you right back there. Coming back to our falcons. Tanya Anderson's asking, in terms of the prey data that you guys have been collecting, have you found that the falcons are more likely to feed on sociable weaver chicks when other prey is scarce, or is that not the case?
Yeah, so we don't actually know, Tanya. We've tried to collect data with video cameras, but they go in and out these chambers pretty quickly. So we've been collecting some fecal samples now, which seems the easiest way to get a good understanding. So you can get these DNA barcoding done on the feces, and I think we need to wait for that data before we can say for sure. I mean, when we see prey remains, we see like legs of, it's not only sociable weavers but other birds as well, and then you get a lot of lizard tails. They seem to not finish the lizard tails for some reason. That's always like left over, but I think we're under recording the invertebrates for sure. They're eating locusts or grasshoppers and other things, but we've actually found it quite tricky to get some basic information on the diet. With a big raptor, I don't know, it's a bit, I wouldn't say easier, but slightly easier. But these little guys they basically passerine. I'm not even a raptor biologist, but if you're a passerine lover, this is like the raptor to work on. But it's not easy to really understand what they're doing. But it's something we definitely want to look at.
Fantastic. And obviously whatever goes in needs to come out. And you showed that incredible picture of the white doormat. One hypothesis I didn't notice you say, and Teddy Adams has picked up on it as well, is it a possible way for birds to identify their tunnels in this heaving mass of weaver colony tunnels and sort of keep out sign for weavers?
Yeah, it's possible. It's something definitely something we want to investigate. At least, I mean, we were thinking as a signal, because we've seen with that example of this aggression between neighboring groups, with them. So they might need to find their way. I think, I don't know. Birds are quite incredible. I don't know if they would need this white kind of neon light telling them where they need to go. But I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it might be that it's some sort of signal to other pygmy falcons as well that this one's occupied, because you can very clearly see the difference between fresh fecal mat and an old one. They go a bit pinkish when they get a bit older. So I don't know. We need to go through that all those hypotheses, and hopefully we have an answer. But maybe we haven't. Maybe it is some other hypotheses we haven't thought of. So definitely send through your ideas if you have any, because actually the temperature one, I mean, that actually I was speaking to Vernon Head at the FITS one day, and that was his kind of contribution, and he was like, it's obvious, So we have tested it. I don't know if Vernon's in the audience, but it's not the case, but that's where that kind of stemmed from. So people, if you have a good idea of why they might be doing that, it'd be quite interesting to test.
Yeah, Vernon, being the wonderful architect that he is, I can imagine would have an architectural solution to that that question. Thanks, Vernon. We always appreciate your insights at BirdLife. You mentioned that one of your females was about 10 years old. Is that correct? How has she been in the same territory? Has she stuck around for the entire project? And how often do you see sort of movement of the females between the nesting trees?
Yeah, so they do move. So this female it's an incredible story, and I think the whole group kind of really has a kind of affinity to her. So she's from colony 1. one of the first birds. It was the first colony I mapped, and it's colony 1, and she was ringed there, and she's been in that colony ever since. Oh, in that, actually, in that territory, they sometimes breed in colony 2, which is also in their territory. But there's some pairs that I think in these very good territories, especially those along the Coronaberg at the mountain, those seem to be the more productive territories. They tend to, it's the same individuals there year after year. And then suddenly there'll be a change. Maybe the birds, didn't, die during the winter or something, and they get replaced. But there's some are in the same territories for year after year. But we do also get divorces. We get, a pair that bred together, and then suddenly the other one will pitch up at some territory a few hundred meters or kilometer or 3 up the mountain range, and will be with a new male or female. So there is some movement. And that's another chapter of that Femi's going to be writing on, is looking at this dispersal, both breeding dispersal, that's adults between their breeding events, and then also the young birds. And the young birds are the ones, of course, that are moving a bit more. But it's always, you're always limited by your study site to some extent. So we've had some movements of, I think, close to 5 kilometers, which is still within the study site. But whether there's some young birds going out, into beyond where we go, there's a big section that has lions where we don't go, of course. So how far they go into that area, and that we don't know. So and our GPS tags actually that we use. Again, if you work on vultures and martial eagles, which I think the audience have heard about recently, it's great. You put the device on and they carry it for years and years, and you see where they move. These little guys, we're very limited by what we can put on. So we have little devices. They loggers. They don't transmit. So they under 2 grams, which makes it fine, but they don't transmit the data. So we put them on, and then we catch the birds again after 2 or 3 weeks and remove the devices, and then get the log. So they need to stay, and we've always got them back. But it limits our idea. We can't just put it on a young bird, and see how they explore the landscape and how far they go. But I'm sure the technology will get there eventually. And I think once that happens, and it starts being available for birds around 50 grams or even less, I think the studies are going to be quite fascinating. So anyway, we'll get there eventually.
Absolutely. I mean, we look at the work coming out of the States with that motor system and their snow bunting tracking through migration and that sort of thing. If we can set up networks like that for our more passerine, smaller birds, game changer. So anybody out there with a couple spare million billion, let us know. But I think last theme we're gonna touch on being the Kalahari and the predictions of extreme heat and aridity. We've had Professor Andrew McKechnie on the show talking about the Hot Birds project. Have you seen any impacts on your population during your study linked to increasing temperatures and aridity in the Kalahari?
Yeah, so I mean, we have now a 10, 11 year kind of period, but I mean, there's a lot of variation. So if you look within that 10 years, I don't know if there's a clear trend one way or the other. Of course, they definitely don't do well in these very dry, hot years. We can actually see it in the number of breeding groups the proportion of territories that actually have breeding groups. So it seems to be a function of the productivity. So after a dry year, you start getting only pairs and not so many groups. So it's cycling up and down for sure, but whether that's a clear trend, I don't think we have any evidence of that yet. I mean, these birds do quite well. They're least concern. It's not a species of massive conservation concern. Of course, they're fascinating and everything, but I mean, the heat waves for sure. If the heat waves start hitting, all these birds in the Kalahari, it's going to be tricky. These Pygmy Falcons are essentially like small shrikes. They sit on top of the trees and hunt down. So if it's above 40 degrees, 45, getting around there, I think they're going to have problem to meet their daily energy needs, and feeding chicks is going to be a problem. So if these heat waves and heat events continue to increase, I think there'll be some problems. I know there's my colleagues published something on the hornbills recently, and looking at how those very hot times are quite devastating to their reproduction. We haven't seen anything like that as yet, but definitely in the dry years, most of our nests are failing. Whether it's the heat or just general lack of food is difficult to say. But the drought that luckily was broken now 2 years ago is given Femi and everybody a lot more work. At least yeah, it's a blessing, but then you suffer in terms of the early mornings. You have to wake up and do the work. So yeah.
Oh, well, long may the rains continue over the deserts.
Exactly.
But one sort of last question, and this is actually from our speaker last week. It's great to have Nikki Forbes with us, and I hope she's stuck around. But Nikki is very interested in understanding the sort of limits to their distributions, particularly in the easterly direction, and what sort of restricted them to that northwestern corner of South Africa and Namibia.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the one answer would be just the sociable weavers as a start. So I mean, the overlap is basically exact with the sociable weaver distribution. So I know as you go further east, like in Benfontein, where there are still lots of sociable weaver nests, there's not permanent Pygmy Falcon territories in that study site. So there is something which is making them less likely to be in the east. Yeah, what that is, yeah, I'm not quite sure, but definitely I think where there's weavers, there's generally the possibility of being falcons. But yeah, when the weavers aren't there, it's quite, yeah, it's a tight system. Of course, they need them, but yeah, I'm not sure in the far east. It's, yeah, I'll be guessing, I think.
Absolutely.
Maybe too much rain or something like that. Maybe they don't like rain, or I don't know.
Definitely, yeah. That Namakuru boundary sits as quite a hard one. It'll be interesting to see with these grasslands marching westwards if we see any movement on that SABAP data, particularly under Atlas regions. So those of you who are Atlases, get out there and mark where you're seeing these sociable weavers and the Pygmy Falcons, definitely.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, in the Karoo, of course, the weavers are in the Karoo, and there I think when there's, you know, their grass is a limiting factor for the sociable weavers. They can't build when there's no grass. And the nests that I visited in some of the really, during the drought again, when there was no grass, you start seeing more like human material threads and that being used in the nest because they just don't have grass. I think that's quite limited. And I think the similar things happen in the far west in Namibia. I think when grass becomes limiting, the nests start looking a bit bedraggled and they can't maintain them as well. So yeah.
Brilliant. Rob, I could sit here all night and discuss this with you. This has been such fun and so interesting to talk falcons and Kalahari, and just a massive thank you to you for sharing your incredible expertise with us this evening. It really has been a wonderful, wonderful show. I'll give you a few seconds just to say your last few sentiments, and then we'll wrap up for the evening.
Yeah, no, thank you everybody for listening. And yeah, I mean, thank you to my group, because yeah, you know, I started the project. The first 3 years were great. I had these 3-4 month field seasons, but yeah, when you get a bit older, your trips to the field get shorter and shorter. So yeah, most of what you saw today was the work of a lot of other people, and I get to pretend I thought of everything, which I didn't. But anyway, yeah. So thank you to them, and yeah, and thank you for having me here as well, of course.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure, Rob. Thank you. And as always, everyone, we will be back next week. You can join us, as I said, for our 100th episode. It's going to be the Mouse-Free Marion project, and we are really looking forward to hearing what all they've been up to and celebrating World Albatross Day with them. From me, it is a good night, and we'll be back next week, Tuesday, same time, same place. Keep your eyes on the skies and keep enjoying those birds. And I will see you all at 7 o'clock next Tuesday. Rob, thank you again, and good night.